Alright, so this is a fairly comprehensive guide to dyeing. So we've got wigs, fabrics, more is going to cover eater bags and completed pieces. So, jumping right in. So the guide is going to cover Rit Dye. I know there are more types of dye, but they pretty much have a stranglehold on the market in America. You're going to be able to find them pretty much anywhere, so like Walmart, Target, they're going to have your more basic colors. They might not have synthetic dye also, so they're going to have like black, brown, dark red, and navy blue. And then if you're looking for fun colors, probably hit up your craft stores, so like Joann's, Hobby Lobby if you must, Michael's. So basic directions are going to be on the bottle or box depending on what kind you're using. I'm not going to be covering that. That's going to cover like the temperature you're going to keep it at, how much you're going to need for your yardage of fabric. Again, they're going to have that written in detail on every single bottle or box. And then their site actually has a very nice guide on how to mix certain colors. Again, if you're seeing something that you have an idea, you're trying to make a raspberry color, it's going to be pink and purple. But they have a very nice mixing guide, especially if you're trying to mix like powder and liquid dye, and they'll have more on that. Alright, so powder dye. This is what I started with back when I was 12. I wasn't the best at using it, but it is very simple to use. Again, it's powder. You add it to hot water. Usually when I'm working with this, because it doesn't need to be boiling, I had a big plastic bucket that I kept in my backyard, trying to minimize the mess because, again, I was 12. It's also the cheapest option out of all of these. So it's about $1 or $2 a box, depending on if you're buying from a craft store or Walmart. It's made from natural fibers, so cotton, and it's available in the most amount of colors. I want to say they have like more than 20, which is a good amount. And then cons of that is that it needs to be fully mixed. I don't know how well this is. Yeah, okay, you can see it. It has to be fully mixed and dissolved, which is difficult because it's going to dye your bath very dark. And for this shirt, it's like a light eggshell blue. I mixed a very small amount of navy. Could not mix it all the way, so there's just a little pink splotch in the shoulder. So it's very important that you mix it all the way. It's also recommended that you wear a mask. Again, it's not toxic. You can breathe it in. Should you? No. And it's not very potent, so you might need more than one box. So it can rack up the cost. Now, all-purpose dye, basically the same, but now it's liquid. Extremely easy to use because you don't have to worry about mixing it as much. It's twice as potent as powder dye, which is fantastic. And it's easier. I find it easier to mix with other colors because now you don't have to bother with a measure. Like, you can kind of eyeball it instead of exactly measuring powder and then spilling it all over. And yeah, it's a lot less prep time. And then cons, you do have to shake it pretty well because the color can kind of separate and shift in the bottle. It is a lot more expensive, so it's going to be about double the price. And the spills are harder to clean up because it's a lot more potent. So again, I'd recommend doing that outside. And synthetic dye, it is the most potent. I use this on wigs, any sort of polyester material. Other than that, it's pretty much the same as all-purpose. It's easy to mix, it's liquid. It does have to be on a stovetop to work because you need to keep it at near boiling. It is the most expensive option. Again, it's going to run you like $5 or $6, and they only have it in 12 colors, which you can actually see in here. That's all you get. So you have to get creative with how you mix it. You cannot add powder dye or all-purpose dye to this. That will not help. So now prep. First of all, you are going to need to read the bottle. I'm not covering everything that's on there because, again, I'm not covering like temperatures. I would recommend having like a meat thermometer or some sort of very heat-safe thermometer that you can use to check the water. Please wear gloves. I don't wear gloves when I dye things. I've had to go into job interviews with my hands dyed blue before because I did not plan my week well. Please wear gloves. All water is going to need to be hot. Just how hot depends on what you're doing. Again, synthetic needs to be near boiling. But anything else, mostly, I've used like hot bath water to dye things before. Also, don't dye in your tub. It will stain your tub. And then any color is going to wash and dry lighter, especially with fabrics. With wigs, they're going to run more true just because a wig is plastic, so it's not really like absorbing and then washing back out. Materials, a stainless steel pot and or like a plastic bucket if you're dyeing outside. They have like the big ones you can buy from stores like Menards or Home Depot. Some sort of heat-safe receptacle for your finished product. I use a plastic bin. Don't do that if you're going to be boiling stuff because you don't want to melt it. If you wouldn't put it in an oven, don't put something that was just boiling into it. So having like a metal bin nearby. I like to have 2 sets of tongs, just like the shorter ones, because it's easier to pull fabric out of the pot and not have it drip everywhere, because it will, and you want to minimize the amount of cleanup you have to do. I use salt or vinegar to improve the potency. They're going to have more details about that on the box or bottle. They also, Rit sells like a dye enhancer. It's kind of expensive, and it doesn't really do anything different than those, so I wouldn't really recommend it. And then another option is to use the washing machine to dye natural fabrics. You can use all-purpose or powder dye for that. It's not great for specific colors. I'd recommend it if you need to dye something like brown or black, and it's like, okay, there's only one option for this. But if you're looking for a certain shade, I would recommend doing that manually. Pre-process for wigs. Okay, so this is my setup for my Leo wig. You have to wash the wig before you dye it. Most wigs, especially like anything from an eBay wig to an Arta wig, is going to come with some sort of anti-tangle finish on it. That's where they get the shine. That's why they recommend washing them to take shine out. I wash them with dish soap because it's going to cut through the most stuff. It takes the least amount of time, and it smells nice. So that's good. I have everything ready. You don't want to be scrambling while you're trying to dye something because it's horrible. And like you walk away and it's one color, you come back and it's the wrong color and everything's on fire. It's terrible. So yeah, I have my tongs here. There's only one set visible, but there is another one. I've got my dye, and then I've got my bin, and it will dye your lace and your wig cap, so know that going in. If it's a character with like, if your wig has really thin wefts, you're gonna be able to see that. It might look weird, so just know that going in. Process. Also, you might notice for this wig I'm using a neon color that was not available in the synthetics. We'll get to that. So you're gonna need, I usually bring my water to a boil and then reduce to simmering just to make sure that it's right. Make sure that it's hot enough, you know. And then I add a small amount of dye. Usually I start with like a tablespoon or 2, depending on how dark it needs to be, then add more. Because you can't take it out. You can always put it back in. You can always turn it off, go to the store and buy more, add more. It can take anywhere from 5 minutes to an hour. Usually Rit recommends that if you're dyeing something like this, it's going to take 30 minutes. That's not true if you're using the right type of dye. So like I dyed a wig from brown to black. That took 5 minutes. The black's really potent. Like I rinsed it off, still black. Whereas this wig, I used all-purpose because I needed it to be neon green. They do not offer that in synthetic. It took a straight hour of boiling and stirring it for that to take, and even then it's super light. Again, I do not recommend doing that if you can make it work any other way. It is an hour on your feet. I also recommend having like a comfy foam mat down because you don't think it's going to hurt your knees, and then it does. Check your color periodically just to make sure it's pulling right. It's kind of hard to see, especially if the bath is darker. Like this is really light, so it's pretty easy to check. So usually I will grab a chunk of hair out with my tongs, have a wet paper towel, let it cool a little bit because you don't want to touch something that was boiling, and then wipe at it. It's going to take almost like all of the loose dye out. Any dye that would run out on its own, it's going to pull it out a lot faster, and it's going to give you an accurate color read. That does not work with fabric. We'll get there. And when you're happy, you can take your wig out, pull it out with the 2 tongs, let it drip dry, and then put it in your bin. You're going to have a little bit of mess, so again, I'd recommend doing this over like tile or put something down that you can easily clean up. And then I say you can dump out the dye with a wig because again, it's not really going to change color off of that paper towel check. Do not dump dye for fabric. So after that, put it in your bin, rinse it a couple times with cold water, and then I wash it with dish soap again just to make sure it smells good. The dye doesn't smell bad, but it doesn't smell good. So something nice. And then, yeah, wash it until it runs clear, and then I let it hang dry just because if you heat dry something, it's going to hold the shape, and that is not what I wanted it to look like. It's just going to be faster to work through. So once it hangs dry, usually it takes like overnight. I just hang it up in my shower. I brush it through with a straightening iron. I separate it into like 2-inch chunks and then work your way up from the bottom, and then it straightens the wig out. It's completely usable again. Most wigs come kind of curly, so that won't be an option anymore, but you can add those back in. Now we're out of fabric. First of all, you're gonna need to unfold it. Think about tie-dye. If it's creased in any harsh way, especially if you just bought it from Joann's and then you dump it right in the pot, it's gonna pull very light in those creases. I also recommend putting it in the washing machine before dyeing it. Again, I used to work in Joann's. I do not know what they do to treat those fabrics, but they do something. It's gonna pull really splotchy. My sister asked me to dye her a pair of pants dark brown for her, and she had pre-treated them with bleach and not told me about that. Told me she washed them. She hadn't. And she's like, why is it really light on this leg? And I was like, I don't know, man. You said you washed it. She's like, oh, do you think it was the bleach? I'm like, yes, definitely. So always wash your fabric. Also know if it's natural or synthetic. Usually if you're buying from Joann's or you've recently purchased it, it will have that labeled. You'll be able to check. But if it's an old piece of fabric, maybe it's gifted to you from like family or a friend, I would recommend burning a piece just to check. Don't burn your house down, be safe. But if it melts, it's synthetic, and if it catches on fire, it's natural. And then you can save money on dye, so everybody wins. And then if you're going to be ombreing it, wet your fabric first, because it's going to help the dye climb up easier. Process. So again, you're using hot, non-wet... yeah.
Ombreing?
Like if you need it to be darker on the bottom, lighter on the top.
I see.
If you're looking for like a gradient.
Alright, I see. Thank
you. So if you're using natural fabric, I like to dye this inside just because I want it to be hotter. It makes the process go faster. If it's synthetic, you're going to be using boiling water. Everything I've dyed in like the last year has been synthetic, so that's been my recent experience. I recommend cutting off the bias strips. That's like the fringy part on the edge of the fabric. Cut as much as you think you're going to need. Honestly, I just cut all of it off and then cut it into like 5-inch strips. And then I dunk that in the bath, let it sit for a little bit, and check to make sure the color is right. Because different fabrics are going to pull differently. And again, the bath might look like a really dark blue. It could pull super light. This bath was so dark, I could not see the bottom of the pot, and it pulled like this. So, this and this were both put in the same pot, but they're two different fabrics. So, that one's very dark, that one's a lot lighter, and I checked both of them before I put them in. So once it's actually in, I just kind of stir it around because it's going to want to rise to the top because there's going to be air trapped in it. So that's not going to make a huge difference as long as you're checking it, moving it over like once every 5 minutes or so, because again, it can take up to an hour. Once you're happy with the color, again, don't be married to it because it's going to wash and dry lighter, but once you think you're satisfied, take it out with the 2 pairs of tongs. Again, it's going to help it drip dry faster. Put it into your bin, save your dye. Do not dump that. And then now it's in the bin, wash and dry it. You can wash it with your hose, you can wash it in a sink. I've washed things in the shower before. Washing machine is always going to be the best. I just run it on like the 10-minute rinse cycles. It's gonna get all the color out. Otherwise, like, I've had things that are still, if you wash it, the dye still comes out. And I was like, oh, I thought this was fine. No. The color is going to be lighter after it dries. You can either put it in your dryer or just, I recommend letting it air dry just because like you just boiled this fabric. You don't want to hurt it anymore. Yeah. And if you are going to dry it, run it on a delicate cycle. Alright, so other uses. I use dye on Ita bags, which I did not know you could do. I was trying to dye the lining of your Ita bag here. And it ended up dyeing the leather. Or it's not leather, you know, it's an Ita bag. But I was like, okay, this is something. Things I did not know. It will dye the clear vinyl in the front. Cut that out first. So if you're planning on doing this, Amazon sells these little, they're like a cat-shaped Ita bag. It's a lot easier to remove the front vinyl. So it's a great starter because that way you do not ruin the vinyl. You can see that's not sparkly because I had to buy more from Joann's. It was embarrassing for everyone. You're also going to want to remove the zipper pulls because the boiling water is going to cut through whatever they use to treat that. And they're going to be weird, dark blue, awful, just not great. I replaced those zipper pulls. Again, that was the first one I ever made. You're going to need to completely submerge the bag. A stock pot is going to be your best option for that. Stock pot's best for most things just because it's big. They're like $20 new. You can get them for a lot less at thrift shops. And yeah, when you're washing the Ita bag, I run it on a delicate cycle. You can also, again, that's one of those where I'd be like, maybe it'd be fine rinsing it in the shower. And then I go over it with an alcohol wipe just to make sure that the dye's not going to come out and rub on anything. I also have completed pieces. So if you guys know about Among Us. We all lived through 2020. So that was a very hot trend to buy a completed astronaut suit from like, this is the Spirit Halloween one, and then dye it the color you wanted it to be. And people had a lot of trouble with that because it's not easy to dye something that big. So before you start dyeing anything, be careful of shrinkage. especially with a natural fabric like cotton, because it's going to shrink. You're going to need to separate into natural and synthetic fabrics, especially if it's a bigger costume. For synthetics, you might have to cut it into smaller pieces, which is what I'm thinking with this, because you have to fit it into a pot of actively boiling water. So I would say either cut that into pieces, dye it one arm, one leg at a time, or bring it outside and try dumping boiling water into a bigger pot. That just doesn't seem safe. So again, I'd say separate it first. And then don't dye things that can melt. If you wouldn't put it in an oven for, I don't know, you guys know. Use your common sense. If you think it can melt, don't put it in a pot of boiling water. And notes on disposal and cleanup. They also sell a dye removal, but surprise, it does not work as well as the stuff that you have at home. Rubbing alcohol works fantastic. I spilled dye all over one of my favorite concert shirts because, like, oh, it's fine, it's black. There's only a little bit that's got pattern on it. And of course, the dye's gonna go there. But yeah, rubbing alcohol takes it right out. You can just blot at it with a paper towel. Again, dye can and will get on your hands. Please wear gloves. Rit Dye is safe to dispose of down a drain. You can also dump it outside. I cannot vouch for other brands of dye. That's, again, what this presentation is focused on. And then if you're cleaning up a stock pot, I would use stainless steel wipes and or bleach. Not at the same time. You don't want to mix cleaning supplies. And then I just use water to rinse out plastic bins that I use because it's not going to adhere to that. Warnings, do not mix types of dye unless you have explicit permission from the website that this is going to work. In my experience, for Astrid here, I tried to mix powder dye and all-purpose dye to make her shirt the different colors that it is. That did not work out. It all pulled the same shade of weird blue, especially if you're trying to put... When I was 12, I tried to dye some tights purple, and I mixed blue synthetic dye and pink all-purpose dye. The bath looked perfect, looked a great shade, and then I put it in and they pulled bright blue, and I did not understand why. The bath is deceiving. Don't trust it. Don't dump the dye if you think you're going to need more color. Again, this works for wigs too. Usually I'm like, it's not going to change color once you pull it out of the pan, but always keep it. Dye is expensive. It adds up. I save all the dye that I use, like, not when it's been poured, but you know. I don't use a full bottle on everything, so I save those. Test on scrap pieces, again, like either cut a small corner out or just use the bias because the bias is already long and you're not going to do anything with it because it's fringy and horrible. And sometimes fabric paint really is the best alternative. I tried to brush dye onto this. It was a big brain idea and it was not right. I tried to brush it on, let it sit, and it washed out all the same color. I was like, okay, we're going to put some textile medium on. It's not even a problem. The pants are dyed. That worked out because they're all the same color. And then again, please wear gloves. I cannot stress that enough. Alright, so in summation, make sure you have all your materials together before starting because that is important and you don't want to have to be scrambling to find things because it is a time-sensitive process. Again, things can look fine at 5 minutes and terrible at 6. Make sure you're using the right kind of dye for every single item, otherwise you're going to waste your time, going to waste your money, and then you have to clean up. And then be patient because things can take forever. I've had to put things in for 2 hours before and like just kind of passively pay attention to it. It's not fun. It's just like a fun little background stressor. And don't panic because it is really intimidating at first, but it does get a lot easier with time. Yeah, that's all I got.